Shapovalov. Це Mayorov. Андрій Shapovalov. Андрій Yusov, Андрій Shapovalov і Maksym Mayorov.
Я господарю вашу компанію.
Але про це, так.
І навіть бажання не можу загадати.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Andrii Shevchenko, and on behalf of the team of Ukraine Media Center Ukrinform, I want to thank all the journalists who tell the world about our fight for freedom. This time we're having a special event. We will be talking about psychological operations, how to live and work in the era of information attacks. We will be talking to the people who work in the key positions for understanding of this topic. I will introduce all of our speakers. Right by my side are Andrii Yusov, the representative of Central Directorate of Intelligence, Andrii Shapovalov, acting head of the Disinformation Countering Center at the National Security and Defense Council, and Maksym Mayorov, who represents the Center for Strategic Communication and Information Security. Let's start with the general question. Just tell what PsyOps are for a person who never understood what those letters mean. Who can start? Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Glory to Ukraine. The very name already answers this question. It's information psychological special operations. It's the artificial story, is the story which has either which is either made up or is a manipulation, or it's partly truth, partly made up, and it's been it's been a vehicle for spreading the enemy propaganda. Give us the example. Well, biolaboratories, American biolaboratories is a myth that something that started it all. Well, it's multi-layer, it's branched out story that was artificially made up. Why? Why? What was the purpose of spreading such information? To create grounds for legal, or in Russians' opinions, for legal entry of their forces, the special military operation in Ukraine for destruction of those so-called laboratories and to implement peace. So one of those operations, or these specific operations, was the grounds, was the fundamental for creating a picture for the world, for the Russian people, to add legitimacy to this story. So it's fight for freedom, for liberation, it's fight for existence of Russia itself, because our battle geese and battle mosquitoes will kill Russians unless we enter with our forces in Ukraine. And it's not the first story when the Russians were able to make it. It's Transnistria, it's Georgia. So the creation of those myths, the implementation of psychological operations became the grounds, and the world basically swallowed it. The world swallowed Georgia, swallowed Transnistria, because there was an information background when it looked as it was truth, but it was all fabricated. Well, Andrii Yusov, let's see such operations as a military instrument. Is it so? In short, yes, it is so. There is war in the battlefield, and this is yet another front, but it's information front, and psychological operations cost usually a lot, but comparing to the cost of tanks and missiles or the MS-400 system, they're cheaper. And usually the task is just to save on conventional weapons. In what way? Well, there is a number of these: destabilization, disinformation, discreditation, and demoralization. If the army is demoralized, the servicemen will start fleeing, will desert their positions. If Ukraine will be discredited in the eyes of international partners, they will not provide arms and weapons, and that will save the lives of Russian soldiers. If the society is demoralized and the government is discredited, when there is destabilization, it means chaos. It will mean that Kyiv may be captured in 3 days, and those are the tasks put in front of enemies' psychological operations. And the number of these programs and projects is measured in dozens. So some of them are axiomatic already, like biolaboratories, or all the Ukrainians are Nazis, Ukraine is a failed state, corruption, all the weapons get into Ukraine are being sold somewhere immediately, and so on and so forth. And there is a humongous number of people working in this area and humongous budgets, but is the economy comparing to the conventional military budget? But there are some other examples of such psychological operations, but ideally when it's done with someone else's hands, with the hands of usually desperate people or somebody who supported those messages in a non-malign manner, like for example the members of the prisoners of war or journalists who are being pushed some topics for dissemination. For example, there's a lot of talks about the potential attack from Belarus. For example, we charge this topic that this Belarusian direction, that the offensive will happen like tomorrow, that will distract forces and create tension in Ukrainian borders. So this is how the enemy acts. So there are numbers of local and global examples like this. Mr. Maksym, Center for Strategic Communications. So you track everything that happens in the information field. How successful are Russians in those operations? Thank you for this question. First of all, I would like to comment some questions asked earlier. So how frightful is this abbreviation, PSYOPs? I think that outside the professional use, it was only spread with the beginning of the full-scale invasion, and to certain understanding, it repeated the destiny of another abbreviation, another acronym, and that became more primitive. Like for example, PR. There is a phenomenon, the notion PR. So what does it mean? Everybody started saying PR, PR, black PR. So the notion, it got torn away from its source, and is in the same way PSYOPs became something like that. So something that's happening in the information field. If we get back to the classical PSYOPs, the types of operations that we track, the basic notion, the basic synonym for understanding is manipulation. It's pushing or forcing to some actions the change of the moods, the change of the tune, and which forces the object of this operation to commit some actions or not to act, and is being achieved by a number of statements, propaganda, or activities, or other things that usually happen in a systemic manner repeatedly according to certain scenario. And those indicators, such as those scenarios, we can diagnose that it's the psychological operation going on, because we don't really see those officers dressed in uniforms who write those documents what to do, but we see the external indicators. Well, I just want to make sure that I understand it right. So not every disinformation is a psychological operation, and so, and not every psychological operation is the intended misinformation and manipulation. Yes, exactly. So me and my colleagues, we track those phenomena, and it's important to tell the real psychological operation from pluralism of thought. Someone may lie without malign intent, or someone, or to cause losses to the government, to the state. So how can you tell it? So there is a number of indicators. For example, its repeated nature. So we can track information campaign, building the graphs of intensity, studying the actors, and this is how we build this picture. So it's how we put together a puzzle. So the PSYOPs is the creation of such puzzles. So when those puzzles are directed at the object of this attack, so this person, they put this puzzle together and they think that they are the ones who achieved that motivation by themselves. So before we proceed to the floor and let everybody ask their questions, as of 25th of January, what are the key directions of information influence from Russian Federation that you observe? What topics should we track now? Where do you see this repeated activity by Russia? So is the question to everybody. Yeah, let me just start. According to our survey, the main attack is on the topics of resilience, mobilization, the resilience of the society, the resilience of the rear to the campaigns of power shutdowns. So those are probably the two main topics. About the rear and the front. About the front is the investigation due to mobilization explosion and discreditation of mobilization efforts, and stimulation to evasion from mobilization in a number of ways, and its undermining of this faith of the trust in government, in their capacity to provide justice under conditions of electric power deficit and other difficulties that our country is living through. So the attack on the government agencies is purposed as those topics of corruption to show that, to demonstrate that the government cannot make it. It's something that Ukrainians are very susceptible to. What do the NSDC see? We see that Russians try to shake the situation with their psychological operations. They try to shake the world because the PSYOPs in Ukrainian territories were efficient maybe within the first days of invasion or just the first time, and then their efficiency drastically fell, and now the main PSYOPs are being deployed in the Western world, including African countries, Middle East. There is a number of narratives circulating there, and the difference of PSYOPs and disinformation and pluralism of thoughts is that for PSYOPs there is an entry point and the exit point. At the exit point you measure the result. Were you able to change the opinion in the society? And then you summarize it. For Europe it's the stealing of weapons. For the United States it's what they say, it's not American war, it's something else. Why paying so much money? It's so far away. For Africa and Middle East, it's the famine. And for Europe, again, it's like the refugees resulting from the famine. So it's not like it's being managed from one control center where the general seat is the systemic long-term work. As Mr. Andrii mentioned, it's a very expensive work with involvement of artificial intelligence algorithms. And like Maksym said, when you think that you found this or those news by yourself, just be sure that those who wanted you to see those news, they made it. Well, there are two fronts, external and internal. We already mentioned something that's happening on the external front, and it's now its positioning of the weapons in the nuclear power plants, nuclear provocations. Nuclear topic will always concern the world and driving away attention from Russia. And inside the country, everything that assists, everything that supports demoralization and destabilization, like what we're seeing now about the mobilization campaign, all those canned bots, Telegram channels, bot farms, everything that could be activated, it's going beforehand already and working in target audiences, their relatives of the prisoners of war, the families of those who are in the front lines, the attempts to speculate on human sorrow and human distress. This is where the enemy works and will keep on working. And it's traditional. And really the topic is not so important. Corruption, drug addicts, agents, CIA, FSB, KGB agents, it doesn't matter. Total discreditation and the undermining of trust. It's all very expensive, but it's cheaper than war. And Ukraine learned how to strategically cope with that. We will talk later about the attitude of the society. So comparing to 2014, Ukrainians developed an immunity, but we cannot relax so far. But now the situation is way better than it was back in 2014, 15, and 16. Now we may ask questions from the floor. Alla Shershin, Ukrinfor, you mentioned psychological operations going on in Ukraine. So how does Ukraine counter those operations now? Well, we debunk them. The one and only counter narrative which works efficiently with psyops, but we know now that we know that the war is going on for a year, is truth. And any psyops is broken by the truth, is being broken against the truth. So I think we coped with that perfectly back in February 2022, thanks to the technologies, thanks to the people standing united, and with thanks to all this cannibal story with invasion, because the world did not see it right away. We needed a couple of weeks, couple of days maybe, for the world to see it, but we were telling the truth, and all the psychological operations, they disappeared just like ghosts. Any more questions? Max Hunder, Reuters, is the question to everybody. Can you detailize how the standards PsyOps is happening? I understand that there may be a difference between the Ukrainian and foreign market. For example, some PsyOps are targeted at Europe or America. The methods of dissemination of that disinformation may be different. So are they social media, or are they the operations going through some specific journalists? How those narratives are being pushed? is it a mass bot attack, or are those figures with some high reputation? What it actually looks like? So what are the mechanics of that? Now today we created an algorithm with digital expertise. As of today, all of it can be tracked, can be proved and documented. So in the beginning, there is an idea emerging, and the resolution is being taken to disseminate that idea. Then simultaneously, well, we were promulgating that list of experts who simultaneously within 1 hour start promoting some narrative. We see how an extended network is being added to that narrative. So everything which is synthetic, which is artificial, most likely it isn't psyops. It's being done from different points. Then the social networks get engaged, including bots and live people, including algorithms of the search engines, which bring the idea to the first page, and afterwards there are publications in these or those mass media. There is plenty of them in Russia, or they are either sympathizing or they are adherents of the Russian world, or they live for grants. Then the circle is being drawn to the full, and we see the quotations in the mass media of that narrative thrown in the morning, for example. So it's an example. It's an example of the cycle. So when you see all those links, most likely it was done according to the algorithm. Well, thank you. Thanks, Andrii, for explanation of mechanics, and we can show a lot of examples. It's plenty of them. I just thought about the story that happened in the summer last year about that Amnesty International report, which said that the Ukrainian military pose risk, or the tactics of the Ukrainian military poses risk to the civilians. I don't know if it was the development of PSYOP's campaign, or was it the entry point about Ukrainian military cover using the civilians as the life shield, but that particular report became the whitening and of Russian rhetorics that Ukrainian military pose threat to the civilians, that they don't do warfare according to their rules. So it provided the legitimacy to those rhetorics, which increased after that publication, which led to a cascade of more publication and more discussion, because where you cannot push some narrative bluntly, there is some alternative thought brought up that the situation is ambiguous, and when you cannot convince somebody that, unlike Russia, Ukraine is not honest in terms of warfare, Russians made it that everything is ambiguous. Like, yeah, Russia does it in the same way, but Ukraine is no better. It's the equalization of victim and aggressor, and it's satisfactory for the initiators of such psyops. Andrii, what are the structures? Or you wanted to add something about the mechanics? Well, there are already enough details for mechanics, but I wanted to say about the basic materials. It's about the crucified boy. So there are operations when there were no boys at all. The boy was not present physically, but there is also some fabrication, like in the theater. We're talking about the Belarusia topics, the railway carriages with Russian military going back and forth to create another wave to reinforce that narrative that there are trains coming with Russian narrative and the offensive is imminent, or when, for example, Rossi was walking around the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant and he was shown the rocket presumably launched by Ukrainians, but they've mistaken it, but they confused the sites, but that was good impersonation. They worked very well there. There is no, for some psyops there is no basic materials, but some could have won award, could have been awarded with Oscar or Golden Globe. So what are the agencies in Russia who initiate such psyops? Well, there are similar centers that are involved only in psyops, but such services are present in all Russian special services like FSB and Central Intelligence Department, and there are groups, teams in General Staff and in Ministry of Defense. And in Russia, there is unprecedented number of teams of such centers who prepare psyops. And talking about the number of units and number of people involved, it's unprecedented number for NATO countries, for Europe, for Ukraine, is the most branched out network existing in the world today. More questions? Sofia Nurenko, Channel 5. Within the last weeks, there are videos spread in the disseminated in the social media when the Ukrainian men are being issued are handed and delivered the notice of draft in some unreasonable way, in a number of reasonable ways. So how do you plan to counter this type of psyops? Well, this is something that we were talking about before. It's targeted to undermine the mobilization, to undermine the resilience of Ukrainian society. The thing is that the war is going on for almost a year, and the fact that the war would be so lengthy, less people were expecting it, both in Ukraine and in Russia and globally. So everybody was expecting this story to end sooner. Now we're coming into depressive period, both on our side and on enemy side, and it's related to the cold season, the autumn, winter, and spring, and is the lack of some loud events in the front lines, and that now that this euphoria fades after the liberation of Kharkiv and Kherson region, and now the enemy concentrates its efforts on demonstrating the fact that no matter what was the success last year, now they try to say that the soldiers keep dying without any result, any tangible result, that there are places like Bakhmut and Soledar, and where they say that getting there means to die, so they try to create some depressive and panic mood. So this is what the enemy psyops are targeted at. So they try to say that Ukraine just throws more and more meat in the front lines. So basically telling what Russia is doing. And they try to show that the motivation to protect the homeland is low in the Ukrainian society. So we cannot say where those videos come from. We need some expert analysis. We need to see that this or that episode is not worth it, or it's a professional artistic campaign, so to say. There are different cases, but all those cases are being documented and they're being built in certain operation. I think that the question was regarding some specific video which was shown in Russian or pro-Russian channels as the footage from Odessa region, where people with the small arms handed draft notice to somebody, and then it turned out that the video was shot in Mykolaiv region a few months ago, and it was about the mission of a national police to a crime scene where there was a fight between two men using axes. So they tried to model it. Maybe somebody has information about this or similar videos. Well, I want to just summarize that PsyOps is an interactive game. It's not like we made it and then we go on. Russians obviously track attentively everything that's going on, and if they see that they can shake the situation, we understand everybody has phones, everybody has access to the social media. There are different people, some are adequate, some are not adequate, some are tired, some have some problems. There are old videos, old footages like this story, and those centers, PsyOps centers, they track everything. And using even this small opportunity to shake the situation, to undermine mobilization, to reinforce or create some internal protests, they throw it in. So we should track the artificial nature of promotion of this or that topic. If you see some abnormal interest to some incomprehensible by its nature video, so most likely it's a PsyOps. More questions?
Steve Kleiman, Pacific Rex. Could you comment on any support you receive from the United States, either private, I'll start at the top. Steve Kleiman, Pacific Rex. Could you comment on support you receive from the United States, either via the government or private companies? And also, do you see these same techniques being used to target the American audience?
Well, let me start from the beginning, or I'm sorry, from the end, about the PsyOps targeted at American audience. Well, we already mentioned about the biolaboratories. It's an old and sick topic that was promoted by Russia even before the full-scale invasion. Our center was tracking the statements related to the presence of those laboratories in Kazakhstan and Georgia. So what's common about this topic, which is going on for more than 1 year, is he's being told that they are American. So they are not Ukrainian laboratories. They are Americans, which are being hidden or concealed from American society in some countries far away, such countries like Kazakhstan, Georgia, or Ukraine, and so on and so forth. And moreover, about the targeted nature at the American society, within such PsyOps, there is very strict relation of Hunter Biden, the son of American president. Like, he is the person who either tries to cover or is the initiator or otherwise is related. So the Russian propaganda, they give a pass to the American society, those who don't support the President Biden. So they provide the cause for critics for Biden and his son and American government, Democratic Party. that they are involved in some illegal, murky activity in a country like Ukraine. So that's a pass to American society, so that the opposition to Biden use it in their critics of the active American government. And the first question was if we receive any support from either American government or private companies. Yes, we do. Well, there is an exchange of information in the level of special services in the area of information security, and talking about the cooperation with the private companies on the level of social networks, Google and Facebook. There is an improved cooperation. We have a lot of successful examples when we terminated the disinformation campaigns or PSYOPs campaigns. Well, the worst thing is Telegram. Telegram is a cloak, it is a gray zone, it's totally out of control, and it's a social network which stimulates the spreading of unfaithful information on different sites, and different players use it. But yes, there is cooperation, and the fact that there is a substantial grant support to non-government organizations, civil initiatives that are involved and they stimulate the critical thinking, they do the fact-checking, journalist work. So it's a very significant support to encountering enemies' disinformation, which is going on at the expense of the American taxpayers. What I can add that within the last years, the Intelligence Society of Canada, they segregated two very important topics which were related to external intrusion. For example, about the immigration issues. Someone was trying to shake the society about the immigration issues, and the gas and oil pipelines. It's a very specific Canadian issue that is of both political nature, and the Intelligence Society, they supported that opinion. And the latest word about the discreditation of Ukraine as the Nazi state and the country where the human rights are not supported. And there was an illustration showing how the Russian information framework was represented in Russian mass media, and then in Russia Today, and then in the Western media, like second level Western media, and then first level Western media, and then those narratives appeared in the statements of the Canadian members of parliament. So my question is, how can we be useful for our Western partners in countering such psychological operations? Let me start. Well, the narrative, not narrative, but the field of countering disinformation. The qualification of disinformation as a real threat that should be countered, that even regardless the such values as the freedom of vote, of freedom of speech, but we shouldn't do any harm to it, obviously, but is the way to realization of the necessity of countering disinformation that American society already came up to. And based on our experience of how Ukraine counters the Russian aggression starting from 2014, so expanding that answer to the question about the support from the United States, the realization of the fact that we have to counter it on a systemic level, on a government level, that we have to counter Russian disinformation, Russian aggression, is a great philosophic transformation in thinking of how the modern war is going on. And in this regard, we helped our Western colleagues We help them to realize that the threat is real. Our Western colleagues, they now help us to cope with the threat, to step over our old opinions that there is no such thing as disinformation, that there is pluralism in terms of freedom of speech. Olga Atamanova, dear friends, I would like to ask you, we understand that in any successful, efficient PSYOPs, very important factor is adding legitimacy to it, and which is happening through journalists, through our journalists. According to your estimates, according to your survey, how is this happening in Ukrainian journalist society, and how is it used as an instrument, and to what extent the Western journalists are the instrumental to it? We've heard statements from Chief Intelligence Administration that it will be used further on, that these PSYOPs attacks will be going on. Yes, it's very actual, because the traditional methods used by Russian propaganda, their information network in the world, it became smaller now, and the representative offices are being closed, and the influence on and their influence is fading. Now there is understanding that they're just the means of propaganda. But now they're opening new funds. Foundations are being opened. They appeal to the journalists with an absolutely wide topic. For example, to study the issue of influence of environment, but there is some background purpose of pushing some other narratives. So this is the example of more complicated operations by the special services, but both Ukrainian journalists and our Western partners who work either in Ukraine or those working in the West with Ukrainian topic, they understand that there may be attempts like this. So we need continuous verification, and Ukraine tries to provide such verification all the time. Yeah, if I may, I want to say that the basic narrative is not to identify PSYOPs and identify all the links of the chain, but the main thing is to prove that it's a crime, to punish those involved in it, because otherwise we will chase these psychological operations as the cat is chasing the sun ray. So we have to promote the idea that it results in responsibility. In the worst case, it's called to genocide, which is very, very serious crime, which leads to liability for journalists who promote those narratives, thanks to whom we have the open aggression in Ukrainian land. So it's the matter of responsibility, of liability. It's not like my personal opinion. It's the involvement in crime, because now we all talk about the disinformation, about countering disinformation. So check if there is any liability for disinformation in our legislation. Well, my last question is about our success in the information warfare. There was an expert panel yesterday about Telegram and its role in the war, and the representative of NSDC said that we track the score. Sometimes in some areas there is draw, somewhere we win, somewhere we lose. So what can you tell about the white magic? What can you tell about our success in the information warfare? Well, the fact of our existence, the fact of us winning that we will win this war is one of the components of this story. So it's winning in the information space. As to those information campaign, all of them are successful, that we are being provided the weapons, even the leopards will appear in Ukraine. It all tells us that everything we do it right. As to the Telegram, yes, we understand it's a cloak, but we have to work with the things like it too. Not everything goes as well as Russians would like there. The task is complicated, but it can be solved. We can see almost everything in Telegram, and there is a lot of things of synthetic nature in Telegram. Well, you can see a million views and comments, and well, everything goes right. So in the majority of cases, it doesn't work like that. We feel quite well in Telegram. In Ukraine, there is also there are also PSYOPs units. I'm not talking about civil organizations like us, but I'm talking about the military. Our center doesn't do PSYOPs. We counter Russian PSYOPs, we counter Russian propaganda, but we don't do our PSYOPs. However, in our activity in debunking Russian myth, Russian propaganda, we achieved certain success, and the global success is our resilience. The fact that we were not split apart by Russia, that our society was not split by Russia, it was not driven into that condition of anarchy, of war, everybody against everybody. But as to the local success, I can mention, well, relatively small but tangible, that the use of Kadyrov troops in the war with Ukraine, it had this information psychological aspect. So the Kadyrov troops loyal to Russia, they were used, like using their resume inside Russian Federation. They were like Gurkha, some cruel, efficient, ruthless warriors who just by their very presence in some spots in the field, they should create panic and fear, and Ukrainian soldiers should be running away, fleeing from them, just being afraid to be imprisoned by them, captured by them. So what did it end with? That it ended with a meme that the Kadyrov troops are TikTok troops. They just shoot their videos in safe environment. They shoot some empty apartment blocks. They made a lot of fabricated videos, and the discovery of the fact that they are not the real warriors, they are animators, is one of the local victories, small but very important. In the majority of cases, when we ask the question whether we should do some PSYOPs against Russia, the worst ideas are already given life by Putin and his troops. All we have to do actually is just to spread the truth. And first of all, in Russian Federation, which is very difficult, but this work is in progress, and we should spread the truth all around the world, including Ukraine. We have to communicate with the society. From this vantage point, the government, the democratic government, is different from non-democratic. So the network of centers for strategic communication that functions that emerged after the beginning of the full-scale invasion that emerged in Ukraine, it's a good result. And it is all happening in cooperation with the civil society, with the non-government organizations, international partners. Ukraine is way more open than the aggressor state, and the communication with the society and the external world is more open. And me, as a representative of the chief Directorate of Intelligence, sitting here in front of you, talking to the openly to the society, it demonstrates something. Andrii Yusov, Chief Directorate of Intelligence, Andrii Shapovalov, Disinformation Countering Center of National Security and Defense Council, Maksym Mayorov, Center for Strategic Communication and Information Security. Please follow our announcements and stand with Ukraine.